If you're a regular Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listener, please rate and review us on iTunes or using the podcast app on your phone. And so I want to give a special thank you to Lee Stepper, who just gave us this 5-star review. I discovered David Barr Kirtley's podcast several years ago, and have been listening ever since. David has interesting and purposeful conversations with the leading lights of science fiction and fantasy. I consistently learn a lot from the show, whether it's a roundtable discussion of schlocky 80s Dungeons & Dragons movies, or a conversation with a grand master of science fiction. I particularly enjoy the balance between screen, print, and gaming content, and welcome the exposure to great new material that has enriched my life. So big thanks again to Lee Stepper for that great review. Alright, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 414 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Max Barry. He's the author of several novels, including Jennifer Government, Company, Machine Man, and Lexicon, and is also the developer of the online nation simulation game Nation States. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new science fiction book, Providence. And now here's our interview with Max Barry. All right, so we're here with Max Barry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so your new book is called Providence. So how'd this book come about?
I actually have the very first note that I made for this book, because I keep all the notes that I ever make on my writing. So I have 130,000 words of notes and stuff that got cut out of the book that never made it in. And the first thing I ever wrote for this thing was, there's a war, but the ship takes care of all the good stuff. So there was the idea for me that it would be kind of interesting if we had a situation where there is a war against an alien enemy, and the human crew is kind of redundant in that the technology is so advanced that it can take care of all the decisions for the humans. It's kind of this idea that in 2020 we have drones, we have a lot of futuristic technology that has replaced the role of humans in combat, and the role of people is shrinking all the time. So I thought, okay, if we had these people and they're supposedly soldiers, and they're supposedly these so important people who have been taken away and thrust into this role where they have to save the planet against an alien species, but it's kind of for show in that we don't really need them there. Then what could happen from there? And I didn't have any idea of where the real story would go from that point, but that was the jumping off point for me. Just this idea of, I guess, taking a story that is the kind of story that I'd read before. I'd read a ton of science fiction, as a kid, and all these stories of humans fighting aliens and the sort of possibilities of what could be happening in other races and other worlds was really interesting to me. But there are parts of those stories that I felt were, I guess, dated now, or that didn't really work for me, in that, like, I can't imagine a future in which we're fighting space battles, but the humans have to make all these manual decisions about what to do and where to aim the guns and even pull the trigger themselves. Like, that is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's going to be, the computers will be making those decisions. The computers will be doing the aiming for us. They largely do already in a lot of military operations now. So yeah, it was a chance to sort of revisit some of the exciting sci-fi that I'd enjoyed as a kid. But do it with a bit more of a modern take on it, I guess.
Well, you mentioned in that initial note that the basic idea was that the humans are just kind of along for the ride, and the ship's AI is really calling all the shots. And I was wondering if you could talk about the title Providence in that context, because it had almost religious overtones to me. That once the AI gets good enough, you can't question it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, so the idea is that the warships are called Providence class battleships, and they all have names as well. The one in the book is never actually named, but the others all have names. And yeah, it's as you say, where they're run by AIs that are corporate AIs. So the military back on Earth has partnered with one company in particular called Surplex to put their AI in the ship. So first of all, it's probably worth saying that the corporations on Earth as well are also run by AI. So there is kind of a very thin line between a corporation and the AI that it runs, or possibly that runs it. It's hard to tell which is which, because how this comes about is you have software that is very good at evaluating the performance of employees and for making decisions on who to hire and fire. And after a while, that means that the software is basically deciding which humans get to make it up. So the software is really important in this world, although the people in the book don't quite realize it yet. And so that AI is then being put into a battleship to make decisions about where to go, where to find the enemy, how to synthesize the data it's receiving, and how to engage and how to destroy the enemy and save the human race, basically. So because it is a truly advanced AI, it's too smart for people to pick apart its decisions. They don't really have any ability to say, okay, the AI wants us to do this. Let's think about whether it's right or not. It's much more of a black box where it's making decisions and they have to basically just trust the technology. And this is, to me, an interesting part about how AI works now, where it's the way that machine learning works is quite different to the kind of programming that maybe some of us do or did as a kid, where you give a computer a set of instructions and it follows them and it produces output. Instead, with machine learning, you just sort of throw a box of content at an algorithm and you tell it, these are pictures of cats and these are not. And it just figures out on its own how to tell the difference between them. So at the end of that, you have an AI that can very accurately tell what's a picture of a cat and what's not, but it can't explain how it's come to its decision. And it's really hard for a human to go pick apart its logic because it's an alien kind of logic. So this is a question of the book, that they've got the four crew who work with this AI, but can't really be sure what it is and how it's thinking and why it's making these decisions. And even in the end, whether its goals fully align with theirs.
There was a guy, I don't know if know him, Yuval Noah Harari, that I interviewed, and he talks about this a lot, about how in the coming years, people are just going to defer to AIs on all decisions, because the AIs are going to be making better decisions than everyone. And apparently there's
I haven't heard. Yeah, I haven't heard that, but I mean, it makes perfect sense. And the technology is advancing so quickly, where at the moment AI is still pretty stupid in most ways, but pretty smart in a few. But it's amazing how rapidly it's evolving. And yeah, the sort of unstoppable part of this trend is that it does work. It's pretty hard to argue against when it objectively does make good decisions better than human decisions.
And he was saying, even when it comes to deciding who to marry and just every decision, an AI will be making it for you because it knows you better than you do. And there's apparently there's sort of a group in Silicon Valley who is investing very heavily in augmenting human intelligence, integrating human brains with computers, in the hopes that this is the only way to keep humans in the loop at all as the AIs get better and better.
Right. Yeah. Of course, that's important to us to keep ourselves in the loop, but it's not really essential, is it? So, I mean, in the end, some solution that will be more efficient and keeps humans out of the loop will probably emerge.
So, in other interviews, these are the science fiction authors and books that you mentioned that you liked: Larry Niven, The Space Merchant, Neuromancer, Cory Doctorow, Ender's Game, The Last Starfighter, and John Christopher. Is that a pretty good list there of some of your favorite science fiction?
Yeah. I mean, Philip K. Dick is probably the number one sci-fi author. His short stories in particular, I just love how human they are, but also there's like this melding of a single big idea with a really human situation. Very often a human who discovers that he's a robot halfway through or towards the end. But that really hits a couple of my favorite areas in that it's a kind of mind-bending situation. It's deals with questions of perception and how people create their own realities. I find that really interesting, how we all sort of create our own stories and live in our own bubbles. So Philip K. Dick is a massive one. Neil Stephenson, another sci-fi author that I just adored everything he's done. Probably Michael Crichton is worth mentioning as like just a popular sci-fi, just immensely readable stories. Less hard sci-fi, obviously, than a lot of the above, but still just so accessible and so propulsive in terms of their narrative. He does very clever things with the way he structures a story.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the Space Merchants because, I met Frederick Pohl, the author, at a writing workshop years ago, and it's a science fiction novel where the advertising industry has kind of taken over the world. It's a dystopian story.
Yes.
And he said that he actually he started writing a book about the advertising business and decided he didn't know enough about the business to write the novel, and so he actually went and worked in advertising for a couple of years, so that he would know enough to do it. And
oh wow,
it seems like I could sort of, from what I've read of your earlier novels, it seems like they're in this very similar vein, right? This sort of corporate satire, marketing kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It definitely is one of those books that feels a bit like it was written specially for me. Yeah, I never would have guessed that he'd gone and done that research. It reads very much like the jaded, cynical result of a guy who's been working in the industry for a while and is just sick of the deception within it. Because, I have a marketing background in the sense that I did a majored in marketing at university, and my first real job before I managed to escape and become an author was selling computer systems for Hewlett-Packard and in a sales marketing environment. And you just realize that so much of that is about perception and about creating narratives for people to believe in, regardless of whether they're true or not. And so, yeah, that has really never left me. I'm always writing a little bit about persuasion and how people perceive things, and that can be manipulated. So yeah, that was a terrific book too. The other books that I like are like less, they're sort of on the edge of speculative fiction. Like I really enjoyed that The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. I really like Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro is another big one. And Margaret Atwood is probably the writer I most admire in the sense that she is just so incredibly skilled at crafting sentences and paragraphs and people that you just can completely believe in. And that's a massive part of a story for me. The people are the first part of the story. And if you don't believe in the people, if I don't really care about the people in it, then it doesn't really work for me. So yeah, I really need a story that's driven by a strong character. And sometimes you don't find that so much in sci-fi just because of the focus on the technology and on the ideas. So when there's a book that can really get into the people as well, I find that, that's where the magic is for me.
Do you interact with a lot of other writers, science fiction or otherwise?
No, not really. I mean, I'm here in Australia, so I kind of did this weird thing early in my career where I managed to get published in the US before I got published in my own country, just because I was a 23-year-old kid who didn't know anything about how you actually do get published. And so I tapped into the Alta Vista search engine, as it was at the time. How do you get published? And I found all these results for American websites saying, well, you write a letter to an agent and you summarize your work in a couple of paragraphs. And then if they are interested, then they'll ask for a few sample chapters. So I had nothing to lose. So I just started writing these agencies in New York at the same time as I was trying to shop my book around here in Australia. And I found that the Australian industry was incredibly slow compared to the Americans. So the Australians would take 3 to 6 months to reject me, whereas the American agents would reject me within a couple of weeks. So I managed to burn through a whole bunch of American agents pretty quickly, and then finally got picked up by someone over there. And it's kind of weird because it's meant that Australia is a foreign market for me. So I have about 4 layers of agents and editors between me and any sort of editor or publishing person here in Australia. So yeah, I don't interact with writers a whole lot, especially local authors. I probably email more American authors than I mix with Australian authors. But that's okay. Like the part of writing that I love is the bit where it's just me messing around with a story and finally getting to start to work. I mean, that's really fun. The other stuff you do with authors, I've always found, not to sound incredibly antisocial, but I've always found kind of distracting from writing, and I would far rather be writing than talking about writing.
I mean, I heard you say that you were reading Austin Grossman's book that's not out yet, so I guess that's one author that you are sort of in touch with, or?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You kind of, these guys who get their books published, their early books published around the same time as you, then yeah, you end up sort of swapping a few notes with them, which is cool. So yeah, basically all these authors who are grossly underappreciated by their time. Because when they get too famous, they just leave you behind. But yeah, so Austin Grossman, I get to read his book before anyone's agreed to publish it yet. So I hope it actually gets exposed to the public at some point. But yeah, he does these amazing novels that are like big ideas, but super, super grounded. So superheroes who are very much ordinary people with ordinary concerns. And it's, I guess it's that thing now where, we've all had so many superhero stories and probably science fiction stories in general that we're at about the third or fourth layer of subverting them now. And, he does that really well.
To promote Providence, you did a sort of choose your own adventure game on your website. And I saw you were talking about how much you loved choose your own adventure books as a kid. I was wondering, what were some of your favorite choose your own adventure books?
Yeah, well, I think they just got started. I seem to remember when there were only about 10 choose your own adventure books. And so I don't know when this was. I guess it would have been the very early 80s, given that I was probably reading them when I was about 10. So yeah, they were fantastic. It was so mind-blowing, this whole concept of a book where it wasn't just one story, but lots of stories, and you could make decisions about where the story would go. That was fantastic. So, obviously a lot of us enjoyed that kind of thing. And yeah, I do program as a hobby. It become almost a part-time job in the sense that for my second novel, Jennifer Government, I had kind of realized that I needed to do something to promote my books, that I couldn't just expect a publisher to go, land me on the bestseller list without me actually doing something about it to help them. So I did have this background in hobbyist programming. I loved just making up games. There's a fair bit of crossover in terms of how, whether you're writing a novel or designing a game, you're creating a dynamic system in which there is the potential for certain interactions to occur. So you're kind of setting a framework up within which all the cool stuff can happen. So yeah, I wanted to make up some sort of game. It was a good excuse to work on it for 3 months, create this little website, which ended up being Nation States, where you can create your own country that is run according to whatever warped political ideals you happen to have. And yeah, it turned out to be, really popular. There's like 6 million nations that have been created on it since, I think. So I'm far better known for nation states among most people than my novels, I think. But yeah, so I've done something like that ever since. With Providence, I got to do this cool choose your own adventure type thing, which you can play at providence.training. And so it is an interactive adventure where you are part of this 4-person crew on a Providence ship, and I enjoyed it because it was much more like the actual novel than some of the other web things I've done. So it wasn't like a game that was very loosely related to the novel. This one actually is, almost like a little spin-off from it. But yeah, I got to use some cool old school graphics in it, which was good fun as well.
See, I'm a big evangelist for the Choose Your Own Adventure book, Space Vampire. I bring that up a lot. So I was just curious if you ever read Space Vampire.
Oh, look, I probably did. I really think I read just about all of them until they got up to number, about 80 or something. They're probably in the hundreds by now or maybe more. But yeah, I can't think of any ones in particular. But yeah, I did adore them as a kid.
Yeah. In the book, there's one of the weapons is the VX-10 rifle, better known in the popular press as a lightning gun. And I was wondering if you ever played Quake or other first-person shooters, because that kind of...
Oh, why? Did I rip it off from Quake? I did play Quake. Is there a VX... What is it, VX-10?
There's a lightning gun in Quake. It shoots
a lightning gun. Oh, of course there is. Yeah. Okay. The idea of a gun that spits lightning, I mean, that's like a gimme. I thought you were going to ask me about the Junior Burger gun.
Remind me about the Junior Burger gun?
Oh, it just floated by you. No, that's good because there is a gun that's referred to as the, or maybe it's not the Junior Burger gun. Maybe no, I think it is. Yeah, because there's a gun that has a nickname as the Junior Burger gun, and I kept waiting for someone to pull me up on that because it's kind of a weird reference. And it's like half an in-joke that I had with a kid I went to school with like 20, 30 years ago. But yeah, and I just, one of those things where I just kept waiting for someone to say, so what's the history? How did this gun get the name the Junior Burger gun? But it hasn't happened yet.
Well, wait, so how did the gun get the name, the Junior Burger gun?
Oh, it's a long story. I have so much research. No, I don't really.
Wait, so sorry. You said that there was a kid you knew?
Oh, yeah. So it's, yeah. Yeah, no, because he was just, it's actually in the acknowledgement to the book. I think I mentioned this kid, Freddie, who had read a short story of, it was a space setting, and there was this crew that discovers this floating spaceship. And again, they sort of arrive in this gigantic battleship that has way more firepower than it seems they will ever need. So it's a similar situation to Providence in that respect, where the good guys seem like they've got this under control and there's going to be no problems. And much like in Providence, it doesn't quite work out that way. So in the acknowledgements, I bring this up because my friend Freddie was complaining that they never got to use these guns, and it was such an anticlimax that I'd set up all this firepower that never even got deployed. Which, at the time I defended because that was like the point of the story, that these people were not being saved by their technology. But anyway, I understood his point. So yeah, at some point, it's just, I can't even remember where this came from, but he insisted that, my stories needed Junior Burger guns and has hassled me about this ever since. So I finally got a chance to like use it as a throwaway label. And, it's totally, not related to anything. It's just one of those suggestive things where it's, it seems like there's a story in the background, but who knows what it is, and it's never going to be explained. So yeah, it's nothing.
Okay, but in your head, it doesn't fire a small hamburger.
No. I mean, in my head, it's because it turns things into hamburger meat. I mean, I'm assuming, but no, I never go there.
I did wonder, reading Providence, if you have any experience throwing ninja stars.
No, I haven't thrown ninja stars myself. They play ninja stars on the ship because they are bored and they need something to do, and they engage in increasingly risk-taking behavior. They have great medical on the ship, so the ship can kind of patch up any minor wounds. So it doesn't really matter if they get hit by this stuff. But no, myself, I haven't even done a paintball thing, which probably is about as close as you could get to it. No, I'm not aware if you're allowed to like go throw ninja stars at things. Is there a place you can go where you can just go toss ninja stars around?
There should be, I guess, like there's the skate park. I feel like there should just be the Ninja Star Park.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought of it, but now you mention it, I probably could have found somewhere to go throw ninja stars just to check out. Although I think in the story they're not actually ninja stars; they're like discs that function like ninja stars.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, they didn't ship the crew off into space with a box full of ninja stars. They just made the best that they could with available resources.
I see. Well, yeah, so that's the character Anders, is sort of the instigator of the ninja star thing. Is there anything to say about how these characters came to you, particularly Anders, who's a sort of oddball kind of character?
Yeah, Anders is the one who is the extrovert and has the most trouble with the isolation because they're sent into space for 4 years. And for one of the crew, that's no problem because he's a bit like me. He's quite happy working by himself. He likes to solve puzzles, get answers to things, play with his technology. But Anders is one of these people who's probably doing really badly in lockdown right now, where he needs to have the interaction and needs to emote more. So, the characters really evolved because I started off, as I said, with this quite basic idea that there was a crew on a ship where they were supposed to be soldiers, but the ship was doing all the exciting stuff for them. And I explored that in a few different directions. And the way I write a story in the beginning is incredibly chaotic because I just write scenes and have no idea where they're going, then I will delete 95% of it, maybe keep a sentence or two that seemed interesting and like it might lead somewhere. Try to write a different scene just using that bit. And this process goes on for a long time. I think with Providence, I probably wrote that first note. It was a long time ago. It was probably 6, 8, maybe even more years ago.
You said 10 years I saw one interview where you said 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's probably right. So, and it's not like I've been working on it solid all that time, because I've been leaving it and coming back to it, been working on other books in between. But yeah, it's a really, really messy process in the beginning of just trying to find where the story is in all of these little tantalizing bits that seem interesting. And I think for a lot of writers, they maybe don't go through that enough, where if you have an idea and you think, oh, this is cool, and you start off down the path, then you can drive ahead to 5, 10, 20,000 words just on the initial enthusiasm of that idea. And then you realize that you've completely lost enthusiasm for it for some mysterious reason that's hard to pin down. And I think that I figured out, for myself at least, obviously not everyone is like this, but I found that for myself, that's often a sign that I started off too early on an idea, and I didn't spend enough time in the beginning making sure I had developed it enough that it really had up a full head of steam before I took off. So for this one, I did that for many, many years, tried different scenes. I would write scenes where I had no idea why people were acting the way that they were, but just to see if they would be interesting. And the characters evolved in the middle of that process. So sometimes it was at the point it would be starting with a particular character, like Gilly, who is kind of the main character in the book. And the entire story was actually told from his perspective in an early draft. So his character would drive the story to a degree, in that he's curious. He wants to discover why the enemy acts the way it does. So that would suggest how the story would go. But other times it was more about, like with Anders in particular, who's quite a weird personality. It was more about having him in a scene and then trying to think about who that person is and why he acted that way. So it was almost going backwards with the character. And one thing that I really am proud of with this book is that it has these 4 people in the crew, and you get all of their perspectives sooner or later. And they are hopefully distinct people, and they feel really different to you as the reader. And you hopefully gain a bit of sympathy also when you switch into their view. And it's like not a major deal. You're not seeing that things are totally different than you ever imagined, but you are hopefully feeling like, when you're in the head of Gilly, that Anders is being a complete dick. But when you're in the head of Anders, he's still kind of a dick, but he's not quite as much as you originally thought. So yeah, I explored the characters from the middle outwards, I guess, in both directions, and it was really much an iterative process of just going over and over the same material until it all started to fit together.
In the acknowledgments, you thank your early readers for reading what you call your incoherent Providence drafts. Is that
right.
Self-deprecation, or are they literally incoherent, the early drafts?
I wish it was self-deprecation, but yeah, it's terrible, because the way that I work is once I finally got a first draft underway, so at this point I've maybe been thrashing around in the first few chapters for years, but then I've actually gotten all the way to the end of a first draft, and I really believe that you need to have a ton of delusion to make a first draft work, in that it takes an incredible amount of time to write a first draft, and you need so much faith in your own work to get to the end of it that a lot of that faith has to be misplaced. You can't actually write a brilliant first draft. That doesn't happen. Even great writers don't write brilliant first drafts for the most part. There are annoying exceptions, but they are always kind of weak and don't come out as well on paper as they seemed in your head at the time. So there's this kind of terrible process at the end of a first draft where I've deliberately allowed myself to fall in love with it more than I should have. And I'm deluded about how great it is. And so then it's time for me to get some perspective, and I ship it off to a bunch of people who generally read my early stuff and whose feedback I have grown to trust and to understand where it comes from. And then I use that feedback to go reread the book and get my own perspective on it. And so that's always this terrible process of like falling out of love with the book to a certain degree and realizing, oh yeah, I totally realize now that this actually doesn't make sense like I thought it did, or this character is way less likable than I imagined. So yeah, I do feel kind of apologetic towards those early readers who put up with some pretty crappy first drafts as I rewrite. Yeah.
You said that you were working on 4 different books at once over these past years?
Yeah, I took a long time after Lexicon, which was my previous novel, published in, I think, 2013. So the reason I took so long is I was going back and forth between 4 different books. So it's quite fun to do that. It's quite rewarding creatively to work on a book for a while, and then when you get sick of it, switch to something new. But it's also a really fast way to finish no books. So I have quite a few finished or almost finished now, but yeah, it's been a while between drinks.
Do you think in the future that you will sort of curb the number of simultaneous projects you allow yourself to engage in?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know. It's not something I planned. I'm always just following my own instincts on these things. And for as long as I've been writing books, I still haven't really learned anything more profound than to follow my own instincts and to just, if I'm enjoying something, if I think something's interesting, then to allow myself to pursue it. And I can't force myself to write a book. I actually tried this when I started writing full time. I decided that it was such a precious thing to have this time and this opportunity to write full time. So I would take it super seriously. So I worked 9 to 5. I had a little office space. I'm pretty sure I even wore a suit to my first day, at least maybe my first week before I stopped doing that. And I would hit a word target. So I would do the sort of the National
NaNoWriMo.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Where you have to hit a certain amount of words per day. I think it's about 2,000 words a day. And I could do it. But at the end of the month, I had a terrible book because all I was doing was just trying to hit this artificial word target. And, you know, as a reader, you don't want to read a book that somebody has just hit a certain amount of words. If anything, you want fewer words with more impact. So, I found that it was a really counterproductive way to work for me. And I've always just trusted my own weird organic process ever since. Not to say that I don't, actually have the discipline to plan a book or to rewrite a book or anything like that, but at least for the important things about deciding what I'm going to work on and where the story is, I really respect the need to find that organically and to let it, to nurture it and not to try to pound it into some sort of shape before it's ready for it.
So the aliens in the book are called the Salamanders. Did you,
Yes.
Did they come to you sort of early on in the process, or did they develop a lot as you worked on the different drafts?
Yeah, that was, again, one of the things that came quite late because the story is focused on the crew. And so we don't really know much about the enemy until reasonably late in the book, sort of more than halfway through. And so for an early draft, they were just an enemy. I hadn't even decided if this was some sort of story where there was a human enemy or whether it was alien or what kind of alien it was. So, and that was okay. I actually could work like that because the point was that there is this crew who are trying to figure out what kind of war they're in. So they were learning the truth kind of at the same way that I was. Not quite, of course, because now in the book it begins with this encounter with the enemy, so you sort of learn a few important things about them right up front. But there is this question in the book of what kind of life form is the enemy, and also what kind of life form, if any, is the AI, is the ship that they're actually living inside. So it's this question that they have where they begin knowing that the enemy is hostile and that the enemy is attempting to destroy humanity for reasons that aren't entirely clear. But this question of of how the aliens act and who they are is a big part of the book. And it was an exciting part for me to work on because I wanted to do a story that would play out on a couple of levels. So first of all, you would have this level of people who were living out this sort of very personal adventure. And hopefully you care about these people and you think they are making decisions similar to the decisions that you would make in that situation, and it can be a story that you believe in. But at the same time, there's this war going on, which is kind of like a big wheel turning in the background, in that you can't really get a sense of the whole war at once. War is a massive thing. So the war involves a propaganda effort back on Earth to convince the people there that this war effort is worth funding, that all the people making sacrifices and pouring their tax dollars into building these gigantic battleships is actually worth it. There's the actual battle for survival, where it's the ship versus the enemy. And also they are kind of in a battle against the universe itself, in that we are these little humans on this little planet in this tiny little bubble of warm air, in a universe that is incredibly hostile, that is hostile to life as we know it. And I've always found that kind of interesting. I've probably been a programmer contributes to this as well, but it's this battle between, on the one hand, a really logical, cold universe of physics, and on the other hand, these human warm stories and narratives and feelings and things that we care about. And I find it fascinating how we can build these narratives, and we can build relationships and stories that matter to us on the stage that is so heartless. So just if I can reference to, maybe you can answer this question for me, because I've wondered this for a while. A long time ago, I read this short story about a man on a spaceship, and I don't know where he's going, but he finds that he's got a stowaway. I think it's a young girl who's stowed away on his ship.
The Cold Equations by Tom Godwin.
Oh, there we go. By who?
Tom Godwin. It's the only story that he wrote that's well known. But
right. Okay. Wow. That is amazing. You got it so fast. Yeah. So the Cold Equations, that's a perfect name for it too. So it was just, I probably read it in my formative years, and this idea that no matter how much we want it, we can't beat physics, that we are living in this universe that doesn't care about us at all. So I found that a really interesting way to explore in this book, where we have these humans who are engaged in this war, and the things that matter to us about it, like who survives and whether it's moral and whether it's just, are not things that the universe cares about. So it was a chance to kind of play out this story on that very cold backdrop.
There was actually another story sort of that era that I was wondering if you had read, called The Good Work by Theodore L. Thomas, where the premise is that there's a guy, and it's in the future, and you don't have to work. It's all like universal basic income or something. But there are some people who want to work. And so they're told secretly that there's a job that they can do, which is to go around the city and tighten all the bolts, because the bolts get loosened by the city vibrating, all the machines pumping out free stuff. Does this sound familiar to you at all?
Right. No, it doesn't. But I'll have to look that up. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and so anyway, I'll just tell you what happens for listeners and everything.
Oh, okay.
But so he has this job going around the city tightening all the bolts, and he's happy because he feels so useful, and everything's great. And then at the end, it switches to the point of view of his neighbor's apartment, and the neighbor is leaving for work in the morning, and he says to his wife, "Well, gotta leave. The loosening crew won't wait."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So just this idea of that,
yes.
Once you reach a certain level of automation, it's more important for people to think that they are needed than for them actually to be needed.
Yeah, that's right. And in Providence, there's obviously this similar idea in that you've got 4 people on a ship for 4 years. And they're not all that essential for the war effort, at least the fighting part of the war effort. And so they need something. And what they need is a little bit different for the different characters. But there's the reason there's a life officer on the ship whose sole purpose is really to make sure that the other 3, who are the only things that can really break on the ship, don't break.
So the salamanders, they have this protective resin around them, and they spit sort of mini black holes. Do you remember when those ideas came to you?
Yeah, the black hole thing I think was pretty early. So they, and I'm not sure where I got that from. It just seemed like a cool idea for me that these creatures could spit out some tiny little dense particle or bunch of particles that would be so dense they would, or at least they would exert some sort of gravitational effect that would be the same as if it was a very small black hole. And a singularity basically that pulls things apart just from the difference in the gravitational forces that are affecting them. So yeah, they are kind of this stupid race of creatures. They're not especially intelligent. They're quite animalistic, but they can spread and they can produce these things, these hucks as they're called in the book. So they're kind of a force of nature in that regard. They're not a personality so much, and the idea there is I was really hoping to deal with aliens, both the actual aliens and also the sort of alien sense of this AI, which is possibly an alien or possibly a higher power or whatever it is, who are not just humans in robot suits or humans in alien suits, but who do actually think in a completely different way than we do.
You mentioned that the humans are being sent along on this mission basically for public relations reasons because the humans back home who are funding this war won't be interested in this war unless there's humans that they can identify with. And I guess I was wondering, were you influenced at all? I mean, that's sort of like a real debate that happens where with space exploration, right, where you could probably find out what's going on Mars or whatever with robots a lot more effectively than with people. But the question is, if we don't send people, is anyone going to care and continue to support the missions?
Yeah, although we got quite affectionate about those Mars rovers, especially when they started to break down. That was, yeah, I mean, it's amazing how we can project human emotions onto technology like that. But yeah, we really got into that. But yeah, I think I find it fascinating to imagine if we had a real war, like a major conflict between major powers, what sort of information war would break out at the same time, or misinformation war? Because the rise of social media and misinformation in the last decade especially has been astonishing. And we've never really got to see that militarized or weaponized to the degree that it would be in a real conflict, because I think, we haven't really been, we haven't experienced anything like that yet. And the way that people are so vulnerable to persuasion is really, like, people have always been far more vulnerable to persuasion than they realize. And this is something that I had learned during my marketing degree, that it was kind of amazing how many people are like, oh yeah, ads don't persuade me, or I don't get convinced by any of that stuff. But, you know, it obviously works. There is a reason that these industries are enormous industries. They're not just throwing their money away on nothing. So they do work to a degree that we're not really fully aware of. And what it would look like in a conflict, I think, would be pretty amazing.
There's a line in the book where one of the characters is looking at the younger generation and thinks there was a depthless narcissism to them that seemed to go beyond mere youthful self-absorption. And I was just curious, is that just something in the book, or is that based on anything you feel about society today?
I mean, to a degree. Like, I'm a lot older now than I used to be. I'm 47 now. I started at 23 when I first started publishing books, and I think you can tell if you read my books that, you know, my viewpoint has changed a bit. I'm always amazed at how we evolve over time. Like, I maybe have less in common with the person I was 20 years ago than with someone my own age now. So it really does change you. And I feel like too that it is an actual problem for employers generally, possibly for the military in particular, that you can't really just get people, you can't just hire people and tell them what to do and expect them to do it. There is much more of a need to actually value them as people and to consider what they may be trying to get out of it as a career as well. So, I found it fun for Jackson in this chapter, who is a very old school military person who has seen the conflict up close, and so doesn't really have any patience with with people wanting to know what they're going to get out of their military career, to run into these younger crew members who are a bit more interested in, their own life experience.
I mean, do you think that sort of narcissism is a natural outgrowth of the technology where YouTubers are the biggest celebrities and stuff, or do you think it comes from something else?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's pretty natural for younger people to be more narcissistic. You're kind of discovering who you are and being fascinated with it to a degree. And then as you get older, especially I think if you have kids and it just gets drummed into you as you're changing filthy diapers in the middle of the night, that the world is actually not all about you after all. You do change. So it's probably pandered to a bit more in the way that everything is pandered to a bit more nowadays. That's the society that we live in, where it's if you can come up with a good way to make people feel good about themselves for a minute, then you can make money out of it. I wouldn't say the YouTube thing in particular is about that. That's more about celebrity, I guess, than narcissism. But yeah, I do think that it's kind of an age thing.
Mm. I mean, there's a note at the very end of the book where you sort of thank the readers for reading a book at all, given all the other distractions and entertainment and things like that. Do you feel like, there have been these studies about how reading fiction in particular and putting yourself inside the heads of other people makes you more empathetic? And do you think there's any link between people not reading books and not being as empathetic as maybe they could be?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that before, but yeah, I mean, obviously the premise is true that people are reading less, and I'm reading less too. I'm definitely guilty of it because we got these amazing devices that we get to carry around with us and have the rest of the world and the other side of a screen. So there are so many forms of entertainment that are easily accessible now. And they're great. It's fantastic to be able to go, play a cool game on your phone or to read about, people discussing politics or discussing sci-fi or whatever you want to talk about. All of that has really enhanced our lives in a lot of ways. But it does mean, that there's probably less of us sitting around reading books for hours just because there's nothing better to do. So it's, like you catch a train nowadays and it used to be full of people reading books, and now you hardly ever see a book on the train. At least I don't. I see everyone on their phones. That is interesting. I do agree also that reading books makes you more empathetic. And I think it's really tough for anyone who's a big reader to not have that ability to put themselves in other people's shoes, because that's what you do. You go put yourself in the shoes of characters that you're reading about over and over, and you see the world through so many different eyes. So the people who are not practiced at that, who didn't read or have stopped reading and maybe lose that, then that would make a lot of sense to me.
You mentioned that, that your first book didn't do well, or that the second book did better because you did this, the game, what was it called? Nation States. Do you think that more authors need to get online and do games or something? Like what role do you think that sort of marketing plays for novelists today?
Yeah, Jennifer Government definitely was helped by Nation States. And I don't know how repeatable it is because it was a long time ago. It was 2003 when that book came out. And so me creating a web game to promote it was something that was kind of new and exciting. And it got attention in the mainstream press even. I think the New York Times did a little piece on how, this author has created this website and you can make your own country. And then, now that sort of stuff gets thrown onto the web 8 times a day. So it's a little bit different now. It's a different landscape. And I've been left behind to a degree in that me having a website and having a blog was also one of those things that was new and exciting 20 years ago. But nowadays, blogs aren't really a thing anymore. You've got to be big on Facebook or Instagram or maybe Twitter. So I don't really know what you do as the next thing. I guess you become a streamer, or you become an Instagram live person, an influencer, and then you do that. But yeah, I mean, I felt really grateful for suddenly having this situation where the two things that I'd really been practicing my whole life, which is writing fiction and writing code, I could suddenly combine into a way where they could help each other, and it could promote my book. And the first novel, Syrup, did definitely sell very poorly. It was it just vanished without a trace because people don't really buy books by authors they've never heard of. So I don't really have like a good answer for how you do it today, and how you sort of break through and do something new and exciting. But smarter people than me will probably come up with good ideas to do it using platforms that I haven't even heard of yet.
What is this in the acknowledgments? What is this story? You say, thank you also to Ivan Held, who before he became my publisher was on the very first cover of my very first novel. What's the story?
Okay, so the story is about Syrup. So I wrote this book, and it was a satire of the marketing industry and about consumerism. And one of the things that I was kind of particular about at the time was that this character, the main character's name is Scat. And I was a bit worried that they would put a picture of some young hunky guy on the cover. And I thought that would undermine my story because my story is kind of a bit about superficiality and how everything is about looks and nothing else matters. And I thought if they showed that the main character was some really handsome guy, then that would just really destroy part of that message. So as it turned out, that didn't happen. They went in the other direction, and they decided that they would put a picture of Ivan Held, who at the time was the marketing manager of Penguin. And Ivan, I'm not quite sure how old he was at the time, but quite a lot older than my character, wearing these natty glasses and with his slick corporate hair. And it was the way opposite of what I'd had in mind. And the way this was pitched to me was, oh, Max, we've got this fantastic idea. You've written this novel about marketing. We're going to put our marketing manager on the cover. And, it still doesn't make sense to me now as to how anyone outside of that company would, make the connection or find that funny in any way. But anyway, I, made my pitch about, I don't know if that's the best way to go. I'd prefer you not do that. And that's when I discovered that although as the author, you have a lot of control over what happens between the covers in your book, you don't have any control over the front and the back. And so they decided they were going to go with that cover anyway. And so Ivan is on the cover of the first edition of my first novel. So anyway, there was, just a thing that happened. But then in the ensuing years, Ivan moved up through the publishing industry to become a titan of the landscape that he is today. And so he's ended up running the publisher that is now publishing Providence as well as my next book. So that was just kind of an amazing little coincidence that me and Ivan are back together again after all these years.
Yeah, that's really funny. I guess probably the last thing I'll have a chance to ask you about is I also wanted to just ask you about, you had a short story published a few months ago called It Came from Cruden Farm. And yes. I don't know how much you want to give away about what happens in the story, but I thought it was a great story. And
thank you.
Yeah, I don't know how much do you want to say about that story? Or
yeah, well, let's find out. It's about a guy, a new president is elected, and one of the first things he does is make a joke about how now you have to show me the alien you've got at Area 51. And he's told, well, okay, if you really want to. So there is actually an alien at Area 51, and they go to find out what it is. It's been there for quite a long time. The government has kept it secret all this time. And it is short story is a comedy, basically a social comedy and a political comedy. And it turns out that this alien has been kept for all this time, and it's been fed a diet of media to try to socialize it and teach it language. And it has become fairly radicalized by by Fox News in particular, along with some other shows, and it has some very unpalatable political opinions now. So they're not really sure what to do about it. So yeah, it was. I got invited to do that by was it Arizona University, and they have a terrific future tense program going there. And so yeah, they basically asked me for a story that fit their theme of the month, which was politics. And so I thought, yeah, it would be a good chance to tell this story. It's actually based loosely on one of the 4 books that I was working on at the same time as Providence, or one of the other 3 books, and which is this idea that we are invaded by political aliens. So it was, yeah, just a bit of fun, really, but also a chance for me to play around with what's happened to us what's happened to the persuasion industry, which has become increasingly pointed over the last couple of decades. And, you know, it seems trite, of course, and many people have made this point before me, but the way that we have moved into an age of information and yet seems less informed than ever, that there can be so many easy ways to gain information, and yet the truth is still murky. It blows my mind sometimes, and just amazes me that we can all live in the same world and see the same world out our window, and yet we have such wildly different ideas about what it all means. Which is really a storytelling thing, that we tell different stories to ourselves. And as a storyteller myself, it's something that I've tried to refine my understanding of over the last couple of decades, where I've really come to appreciate how much storytelling happens in the head of the reader, and that it isn't me typing out on a keyboard and saying exactly what this thing looks like or exactly how this thing works. That if I can sketch out enough that all the important parts are filled in by the reader in their head, then that is the most impactful way of storytelling. It happens in the stage, in the reader's mind. It doesn't happen on the page. So yeah, it's something that I've really been interested in for a long time, that how all that works. And misinformation is not a million miles away from fiction writing, so it's not a completely different universe for me.
So this alien character who's this kind of toxic internet troll, do you have run-ins with those kinds of people ever, or have you successfully managed to avoid them?
Well, I did mention that I have this web game Nation States, which is a political game, basically, in that you can create your own country, and it can be, far left if you want. It can be far right. It can follow whatever political ideals you hold dear. So in the early days of this, so maybe like 2005, 2006, we were getting these Nazis showing up, in the sense that they wanted to create Nazi-style countries. And I think it took me a while to kind of get my head around this, because it seemed really strange to me that in the 21st century that you would have people who wanted to be Nazis. And it was kind of hard to tell whether they were like really wanted to be Nazis, or whether they were just, having a bit of fun with role playing a country, just because it was a game. So, but they never really went away, and they just became more and more numerous, to the point where we basically had to, take action to boot them out, which is not something you really want to do on a site that's about free political discussion. But unfortunately, unless you put up some reasonably high standards of moderation, these places do get increasingly filled with trolls. So, I have had encounters with those people. And sometimes it's illuminating for me, because I think as a writer, you've always got to try to put yourself in the shoes of other people. And if someone's making an argument that sounds totally insane, then I will try to unpack that argument until it doesn't seem insane based on if I assume certain things. If I'm like, oh, that's just stupid, that person's an idiot, then I'm not doing justice. I'm not understanding where it's coming from, because everything makes sense to people in their own heads. You just have to figure out the framework that they're operating from within. So yeah, it's there is a lot of it out there. I think a lot of it is people who kind of feel overwhelmed by, I don't want to talk down to this viewpoint, but who feel like there's so much there's so much complexity to the social politics now that they would like to just push all that aside and go with something simpler. But yeah, it's out there. Unfortunately, it's become pretty toxic and it's become pretty racist. And it probably always was, but that is the modern world. So yeah, to a degree, I think it's good that the internet allows us to see this and to be collectively aware of different viewpoints that are out there. It's kind of better when that happens than when everybody's in their own silos, just believing their own groupthink and being totally ignorant of everyone else. But yeah, it's not great.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you have a game with 6 million countries, you can have all sorts of.
You're going to get a few Nazis.
Ideas,
yeah. That's right.
All right, so we're pretty much out of time. So I just want to say, yeah, I really enjoyed that story. Again, it's called "It Came from Cruden Farm," and I really enjoyed Providence. It's really a page turner. It's really thoughtful. It has a really interesting combination of sort of lightheartedness and creepiness that I think is really distinctive, and that I don't really see very much.
Oh yeah, that's where I like to operate, where it's like it's creepy, but also you're not sure if it's creepy or funny.
Or it's both, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you have any final thoughts or any other projects you want to mention?
No, that's, I've got one of these other 3 books that I've been working on that will hopefully be ready for publication next year. So I don't want to talk about it yet because I'm incredibly superstitious about talking about projects before they are actually nailed down and people have promised to publish them. But yeah, I'm really hopeful that next year I can actually get over to the States and do a book tour that was scheduled for March 31 this year. And then that didn't happen. So it was I've been looking forward to getting back to actually visiting a few bookstores and seeing some people, some readers who have been coming along and, reading my stuff for a long time and turning up to my events for a long time. So I really hope I get back to do that next year, either with the paperback release of Providence or with a new book or both. But yeah, until then, I'm stuck over here in Australia, isolating like everyone else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I certainly hope that you're able to do that. Yeah, I think that anyone who reads Providence is going to, want to come out and see you because it's a terrific book. So Max, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That was terrific.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Max Berry for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.